After a struggle of almost exactly 500 years, a Ram temple in Ayodhya on Ram Janmabhoomi is finally becoming a reality. On January 22, the consecration ceremony will be held and the entire country will be for the very first time watching the new Ram Lalla idol along with the old one as the ceremony takes place. And from the very next day, the doors of the new much awaited Ram temple in Ayodhya will be thrown open for the devotees. Now, in this journey of 500 years, 5 centuries, there are a lot of people, some noted, some nameless, faceless, who have contributed to keeping this dream, this faith alive. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to be amongst one such individual who has done yeoman service in the cause of reclamation of Indian history, Indian civilization, and particularly sites like Ayodhya. And it is my pleasure to introduce in our studios for the very first time Dr. Meenakshi Jain, Padma Shri, eminent historian who has done seminal work on the history of Ayodhya along with several other disputed sites in India. Today we're going to talk about not just Ayodhya but some others as well. Dr. Meenakshi Jain, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. I want to begin by asking you, as a historian, you've done a lot of work on Ayodhya. Today, when the Ram temple is becoming a reality and the consecration ceremony is going to take place, what are the thoughts in your mind?
I never thought I would see this day in my lifetime. You know, when the Allahabad High Court judgment came in 2010, there was so much anti-judgment propaganda in the media, and I read some of the material and I was really appalled and shocked at how they were casting aspersions on the Allahabad High Court judges and saying that we will appeal to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court will have no option but to overturn this third-rate defective judgment.
Wow.
And that is what compelled me to read that 5,000-page judgment of Dr. Sudhir Agarwal and the other judges. And that is when I became aware of how a handful of academics of a particular point of view, how they had held the entire country to ransom. And you know, they were helped by a section of the English media also. But if you examine the debate, it was only historians of 3 universities, Aligarh Muslim University, Jawaharlal Nehru University and Delhi University. There was hardly any participation of the vast number of historians in other universities in Delhi. And that should itself tell a tale.
You know, the fight for the Ayodhya temple has not just been a fight for obviously the devotees and the Hindu civilization that has for 500 years kept that memory of the Ram Janmasthan and the Mandir alive. But it has also been a fight for historians like yourself, for academics like yourself, isn't it? You fought a battle as well.
But I don't look upon myself as a victim. I learned a lot about the Hindu civilizational recovery by studying this issue. And that is something, it's not a vindication of a particular point of view or a particular individual. I look upon it as a very important step in the Hindu civilizational recovery. We have a long way to go. But still, without this first step, the next step could not be taken. And you know, this is the only site that the Hindus have reclaimed by a court verdict after 500 years of struggle. And you know, when we talk about 500 years of struggle, we must keep in mind that there was no Hindu political power in North India. That
for most of this time.
For most of this time, and that was prodding the devotees. The devotees were acting because of their confidence in the righteousness of their cause. And you know, history has a way of unfurling itself, if I can put it that way. Every bit of evidence that strengthened the Hindu case was available to us before 1947. So people who say that this is a BJP, RSS, VHP-driven agenda, they are totally wrong. You know, I just want to make a point. There was a Jesuit priest, Joseph Tiffenthaler. He lived in India for 40 years died in Awadh region and traversed that region for almost 7 years. And you know, he writes over there that the number of Hindus who come to do parikrima of the Janam Sthan is absolutely amazing. It talks about the Vedi, Chabutra, which is the birthplace. But more important than that, in 1850, the government appointed the Amin Commission to give a survey of all the buildings that were there in that site. And the most remarkable statement of that commission was what they call Parikrima Khai Char Taraf, which means that that area around the masjid had got a deep depression.
Because people would come and do parikrama there.
So, and who were these people? They were people, ordinary people, who never got anything from anyone, but their devotion to Ram, it was so intense that one thing I want to say, if I can say, that you know, there was the queen of Orchha. Orchha is quite far away from Ayodhya. She decided that she will come to Ayodhya and seek darshan of Lord Ram. So, in the 16th century, you can imagine what the conditions were, and there was no, you know, Hindu king to support her or to provide protection, but she with her entourage travelled from Orchha till Ayodhya, and she waited there, but she never got darshan of Ram Lalla. So, she said, you know, I will now end my life in the Saryu. So, she moves to the Saryu and she starts, she starts,
going into the water.
Going into the water. When she is going into the water, her foot touches something and she lets out a scream. So, all the people who are with her, they go to the Saryu and find out what has happened, and they find that there is an image of Ram Lalla that her foot had touched.
Okay.
So, she took back that image to Orchha and it is there in a temple in Orchha, which you can see even today.
Right.
So, that is the,
you know, that's the beauty of the continuity of the faith involved here. But can you tell me a little bit about, because your book on Ayodhya came out in 2013, you know, that is before you mentioned the RSS and the BJP came to power, and you mentioned in your lifetime you never imagined this would be a reality, and everybody I talked to from that generation, from that era says the same thing. We never imagined that this could be a reality. The times were such and the odds were stacked so much against the Ram temple that nobody saw it coming eventually. But what was you know, your personal experience like when you were researching about Ayodhya? You know, I think you found it problematic to get your book published at that time.
First of all, the whole journey was a real revelation for me, because I did not understand the depth of Hindu emotional involvement in the deities. Of course, when I finished the book, I couldn't find a publisher. I didn't want to name the publishers who refused. Then, you know, I thought that, you know, I'll die before the manuscript is published, and when I die, they'll say she has left behind so many manuscripts, no published work.
Oh my God!
But it was due to some very kind friends who introduced me to my present publisher, and he was happy to publish it. And after that, I can say I've not looked back.
Yes. Well, in fact, one can say that the reclamation process in itself has not looked back since then, because you know, the work of a lot of people like you has helped in convincing Hindus that this is something that they should continue to fight for, that this is their right. Because mentally it was, from what I remember, mentally it was always asked, one, why do you need a temple there? What is the proof that Lord Ram existed or was born there? Or the fact that, you know, a temple was never destroyed. This is what historians of a particular bent of view have always said. Which part of this narrative did you think was the toughest to break?
See, every bit of the narrative could be easily broken because the evidence was so much. It's just that we refuse to look at the evidence. We mean certain academics. Now, the thing is that, you know, we have evidence, sculptural evidence of the antiquity of Ram worship The earliest is 2nd century before Common Era. That is 2500 years old at least. And it shows Ravan picking up Sita, and Sita is throwing her jewelry in the hope that it will help somebody to find her. Now, a small terracotta, but the person who made that terracotta knew that whoever sees it will identify
who you are talking about,
who it is. So, you know, these kind of things, we have a sculpture of Ram with Ram written in Brahmi on the dhoti, you know, 3rd, 4th century. We have so many panels from temples where the whole Ramayana story is depicted in temples, and from the 12th century we had grand temples made for Shri Ram. So, it is very, very easy to trace.
And this is important because I believe the leftist historians had suggested at one time that a temple could not have existed when the mosque was built there, because Ram worship is an 18th, 19th century phenomenon.
Yeah, and so the temple which was destroyed by Babur itself was the 12th century. And 3 important temples were built in the 12th century in northern India in honor of Lord Ram, and the inscriptions were there. Now, you talk about, they said that it was built on vacant land. Now, when the Allahabad High Court ordered excavations at that site, it was very particular that every day's findings will be recorded in a register signed by representatives of both parties, and no excavation will be conducted without the presence. Now, what happened was, as the remnants of temples began to come
out,
these people, they said that it was not built on vacant land, it was built on a Eidgah. Now, the Allahabad High Court said that till now you were saying it is built on vacant land, why are you saying it is built on Eidgah now? And in your books that you wrote before this excavation, you all said it was built on vacant land. So, the loopholes were too many to be, you know, ignored. They could not be taken seriously at all. The point that we have to understand from this whole controversy is how important documentation is. The Allahabad High Court and the Supreme Court gave the temple to the Mandir party because of the absolute phenomenal amount of evidence that was there. And one thing I want to say, that in the British period, in 1858, that is when litigation started in the British courts on Ayodhya by the Mahants of the Janamsthan. You know, what is the meaning of Mahants of the... Now, we must understand that the Babri Masjid, that complex, there was a compound. In that compound was the masjid, and the open part of it was open. So, until 1858, that is Patrick Carnegie, the first settlement officer of Faizabad district, he says till 1858, Hindus had free run of the masjid, they could worship there as well as the compound outside. It is only we who constructed a
boundary wall,
boundary or a fence, so that the Hindus could not enter the masjid, and the masjid party would remain in the structure and the Hindus would remain outside. Now, the Hindus had a tendency that they will build something as close as possible to the structure that they have lost. So, they built a Ram Chabutra just outside the masjid, but the Ram Chabutra was built in a way that, you know, you could always have darshan of the masjid. So, you know, these cases were filed, and the first case, the FIR is filed by a Thanedar, and he refers to this structure as Masjid-e-Janamsthan. So, nowhere in the world will you see a masjid named as Masjid-e-Janamsthan, and the Mutawalli of Babri Masjid, they come around 1850s, because till that time we do not have any evidence of them there. So, he writes a complaint to the British, and he says that these 25 Nihang Sikhs
have come in and taken control.
And he signs himself as Mutawalli Masjid-e-Janamsthan. He is himself admitting. And you know what is so remarkable about this whole thing is that I read in the papers that the descendants of those 25 Nihang Sikhs are going to be there in January at Ayodhya, and they are going to offer free langar to. They remember that, you know, we did this, our ancestors did it. So, when, you know, people say that Hindus have no memory, they have a very fantastic memory on things that concern them.
But do you believe that, you said earlier, for example, that in 1947 itself, enough evidence existed for this case to be settled? Obviously, later an excavation only added to what the evidence already was there. But why do you think this case was never settled till 2019 for 50, 70 years?
The left intervention, it dates to 1989. That is when they wrote their first pamphlet. At that time, there was a very serious debate among the leaders of the Muslim community. They said, you know, we should hand over this site because the site has no meaning for us, but it means so much to the Hindus. And that is when the left historians entered the fray and they said, don't surrender this site, you have so much evidence, we will provide you the evidence. So, you know, this is something that really needs to be discussed and exposed actually, how a handful of historians and Western English media, how they were responsible for vitiating the atmosphere
and dragging this case out.
See, the evidence, the court cases from 1858 till 1947, they were all preserved in the Faizabad district court, that is in the British period. All right. The first revenue settlement of the British period of 1860 referred to that site as Janamsthan. It never mentioned Babri Masjid. Now, 1944, the Waqf Commissioner, he sends 2 reports and he says the masjid is closed, it's locked, it's opened just 2 hours before the masjid on Fridays, it is cleaned and then it is locked again. And he says it's very difficult for us to offer namaz there because the hostile groups that are surrounding the masjid. So, all this evidence was there, plus the accounts of William Finch, Joseph Tiffenthaler. So, there was no debate. The only thing was that the ASI proved, excavations proved continuous occupation of that site from the 2nd millennium BC.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And there were actually 2 remains found, one of a 10th century temple and then on top of that a 12th century temple, which was a much larger temple.
Now, this building on top of a temple is a facet of our history that we find in other sacred places also. Because according to a Hindu tradition and according to the Hindu Shastras, a temple site is never lost. So, even if it is occupied by strangers for hundreds of years, that is what the Shastras say. So, if a temple is destroyed, you cannot surrender that site.
You build over it again and again.
So, in Kashi, for example, in Ayodhya that you mentioned, the ASI found the 10th century structure. It says it was short-lived. They don't tell us why it was short-lived, but the 12th century temple that Babur destroyed was built on that 10th century temple. No. And when the inscription fell off the walls of Babri Masjid
the
in 1990.
inscription that was found in excavation.
So, that inscription gave a full history of the family who built it, 25 verses long. It's a big inscription. And it talks about, it is made in honor of the person who killed the 10-headed whatever. But what I found very interesting is that towards the end, the inscription talks about fear of the Westerners. So, the fear of the Westerners leads me to speculate that it refers to earlier attacks at this site
on temples
before Babur. And we know that Mahmud Ghaznavi's son came here, you know. So, what he did over here, we can only hazard a guess, but he came here and it is possible that he or his successor
also tried to destroy the temple there.
Destroyed a temple. Destroyed a temple.
You know, the interesting thing is that Somnath was obviously reconstructed post-independence, but the same was not done for Ram Janmabhoomi. And there is an interesting facet that you have talked about, how when the Ram Lalla idol came into the structure, there was an attempt to build a temple there in the late 1940s, soon after independence. And there seemed to be an agreement at that time at the level of the UP government to let that construction take place. But it was the intervention of Jawaharlal Nehru as the Prime Minister that stalled it.
But when the image was installed, it really shook the Nehru government. And the Nehru government wrote to Govind Ballabh Pant, who was the Chief Minister of UP, and he said this is going to very unfortunate development. And the ICS officer who's over there, he is not neutral at all. And it's going to have major repercussions on our relations with Pakistan and China, and Kashmir. So we don't know what the repercussions were. But K.K. Mohammed, who was the commissioner over there, he was told by the UP government that you please prepare for removing the idol, the image, why should I call it idol? Removing the image of Ram Lalla at the dead of night. So let us remove that image. And he said there is no way that I will find a Pandit in the entire UP who will agree to do this.
And you mean K.K. Nair?
K.K. Nair. So what did I say?
K.K. Mohammed.
No, K.K. Nair.
Yes.
So he said there is no Pandit I will find in who will do this. And when you are suggesting this, he adds in that letter, those letters are available, that you have no idea of the depth of Hindu feeling for Ram Lalla. So, and soon after that, the ordinary people of Uttar Pradesh, they wrote a letter saying that we want to build a grand temple. So this desire to build a grand temple for Ram Lalla is not a recent phenomenon.
Yes, it has always been there.
It's been there.
But had the central government at that time supported that cause, do you think it was possible at that time?
There is no way the central government was going to support it. There was no way that the central government was going to support the construction of a Ram temple in 1947 or 1950. Because the central government, if I can put it that way, was not in harmony with the civilizational heritage of this country,
Nehru had famously opposed the reconstruction of Somnath as well.
Absolutely, that's on record.
Yes.
He, he was against all this, the civilizational recovery, if I can put it that way.
Hindu revivalism, he called it.
Yeah, but that's not true. It was a civilizational recovery. And you're talking about Somnath. I wonder how many people know that Somnath was destroyed at least 6 times. And why is it that many masjids were built on the site of a temple? There was no dearth of land available. They could have been constructed elsewhere, but they were constructed again and again on the sites of the temple. And the Hindus went on reconstructing those temples with the same name, but of course much modest structures, because they didn't have the resources. And the last time that Somnath was demolished was at the time of Aurangzeb. He was 80 plus at that time, and he writes a letter to his governor in Gujarat, saying that these Hindus, they have this tendency to go on and on rebuilding temples. Go to Somnath and see if they have revived worship. If they have, then destroy the temple in such a way that they cannot
come
back. So there were clear lines.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows why they did it, but there has been an attempt, this reminds me, there has been an attempt by leftist historians to suggest that, there was no religious angle in the breaking of the temples, even if they agree that temples were broken, that this was more, conquest for wealth, etc. But that's clearly not the reason.
No, but if it was for wealth, how is it that the Somnath temple is attacked again and again when it had no wealth?
Exactly.
It could have wealth when it was first attacked. But 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, what was the wealth attached to the... Now tell me, why were the Bamyan Buddhas destroyed in 2000?
No wealth there.
There was no wealth there.
Exactly.
So it is an ideology, and we will be doing disservice to our past and to the sacrifices of so many ordinary people if we do not pay adequate attention to the ideological forces at work.
Absolutely. We have to acknowledge without any judgment.
Yes.
But I do want to ask you, what part do you think was the greatest treachery done by the academics and the historians of the time, who obviously had the currency to control the narrative of the time during this Ayodhya dispute? Which part do you think was the greatest treachery?
No, the whole contribution was treachery, because they went on creating a counter narrative saying that this is not the Ayodhya, and they said Ayodhya is in Afghanistan. They said that there is no evidence of a temple over here, and it's all built on virgin land. And the way you just look at any of their tracts, it's a real litany of lies.
Even the inscription that was found,
yes,
they denied that it was from that area, it was brought in and it belonged somewhere else.
That's a very long and interesting story if you want to hear it. You know, it fell from, and it's 5 feet by 2 feet. So they said it was planted. Now in 1992, the entire world media was there. It's not some small little thing that you take out of your pocket and plant it over there. 5 feet by 2 feet is
big,
a big inscription. And then to say it was stolen, and you know, when you are exposed, then you don't even apologize. After all, that whole saga of the inscription, the left historians who were in the vanguard of this whole thing, they were totally exposed. But I have not heard of any regret that, you know, we did something that was wrong.
Yeah. You know, forget regret. I do want to ask you that even till today, there is an insistence or a reluctance to accept the historical evidence or the judgment. I mean, there is a reluctance to accept that yes, the temple was destroyed and a mosque was built there, and therefore this is a reclamation. What do you make of that reluctance?
No, but the whole point is that the reluctance has to be based on certain facts. What are the facts which prove that there was no temple there? The excavations of the ASI have shown from 2nd millennium BC that the site was always a holy site
for the Hindus.
No royal temple or no royal palace or residence was ever built there. It was always a series of sacred structures which the ASI report. Now you don't want to accept the ASI report.
So why the reluctance, you think? Is it just because it's ideological and political?
No, ideological certainly, and total antipathy to the civilizational heritage of the land.
I also want to, yes.
And you know, I think this narrative, writing a false history, actually begins around partition. Because partition was along religious lines. But it is also true that a substantial minority population did not move to Pakistan, it stayed behind in India. So, to make it easier for them,
we tried to gloss over certain aspects of our history.
Of our medieval history.
Yes, yes.
And to say that, you know, India was always invaded, the Aryans came from outside, you know, everyone came from outside, language came from outside, there was nothing of this land in any case over here. So, it was an attempt in the wake of partition to ignore or whitewash certain aspects.
Would it be correct to say that at least till independence, we had great institutional memory of our past, but somehow that connect was broken, whether you call it the failure of our present day English education system or powers that be of that time?
See, in the time of the, before 1947, many of our stalwarts, they were beneficiaries of English education, and to name Shri Aurobindo as the most prominent of them, there were so many before him, but they were totally connected with the
civilization history.
There was no disconnect at all. So, it's not that, it's not correct to just blame English education. Before 1947, it was not true at all. R.C. Dutt, you know, he wrote, before he became president of the Indian National Congress, he wrote a Ramayana in English for the benefit of the English readers, because he said only when you read the Ramayana, you will know India better. So, it's only after independence, and then after independence there were people like R.C. Majumdar, Jadunath Sarkar. It is when a certain group who were adhering to an imported ideology, who were not looking at India through Indian eyes, who were looking at India through Western prism that this whole controversy began.
Do you believe there are still occupational forces? You called it a Western ideology. Do you still believe that there are occupational forces that are trying to somehow erase India's own Indic civilization and somehow, you know,
absolutely
occupy our minds? I mean, it may not be just occupation of land anymore, but it is the occupation of the mind.
And see, this point of view, which is prohibiting Indian civilization to take its due place in the academic world, it is there, they all control all the universities. It's not that the so-called Hindu intelligentsia has been able to break their monopoly or their stranglehold on the educational institutions. They still remain. We have a long way to go.
Yeah, talking about that long way to go, I do have to ask you, because you've done a lot of work both into the history of Mathura as well and into the history of Kashi. And those two cases are also picking up pace in courts. In Mathura also you have established, for example, in your book that there is a continuous running history of Lord Krishna and devotion to him at that site, and the story only kind of becomes interesting or mysterious in 1968, well after independence, when that settlement was done and that Katra land was divided for the very first time and part of it was given to the Muslim side. What do you make of the case, and are you hopeful that there is also enough evidence in Mathura, for example, for the courts to be able to decide in one way?
See, for the benefit of your viewers, I would like to say that the evidence at Mathura is much stronger than at Ayodhya, because in Mathura we have epigraphic evidence which is 2500 years old. That's a lot. And it is from Katra Keshav Dev. And we have the earliest literary evidence, the Chandogya Upanishad, which talks about Devki Putra Krishna. And we don't have any other Devki Putra Krishna. So, you know, the archaeological epigraphic evidence in Mathura is phenomenal. I don't want to get into the details, but you cannot challenge the inscriptions. And we must remember that Mathura was destroyed again and again. So what has survived is very little. Then when the British got into Mathura, you know, they defeated the Marathas. Marathas had occupied Mathura in the Battle of Govardhan in 1770, and they remained in power till they were defeated by the British. From the time that the British conquered Mathura till 1947, that is more than 100 years, there are court cases which document the claim of the Hindus to Katra Keshav Dev. Katra Keshav Dev, I must tell your viewers, was never partitioned. It was always 13.37 acres. The Hindus lost not a single case on Katra Keshav Dev in the entire colonial period. Those documents are available and documents don't lie. When the heirs of Raja Patnimal sold that land to Jugal Kishore Birla, it was entire 13.37 acres. That remained one unit. Now suddenly in 1968, an organization which we had never heard of before, Shri Krishna Seva Sangh, it comes to the picture and it gives 2-point-something acres of Katra Keshav Dev to the Eidgah party. Now why? In 1968, when the Hindus have not lost a single case
why
ever.
Was this so-called settlement done?
Yeah. And when the Eidgah party had no case, because all the judicial records show that the Hindus won each and every case. So 1968 is a very mysterious settlement. And why was it done? Because obviously it was done under political compulsion. And the point is, if the Eidgah party got land which they did not own, which they never owned, what did they give in return? So these are questions that.
And you know, of course, we're talking about Mathura, but even in Kashi, the evidence is very strong. A survey has been done, and the survey, you believe, will reveal what is the only obvious reality, you think?
What is available, what we can see as a naked eye.
Yes.
But the epigraphic evidence and the literary evidence for Kashi is as old as at Mathura. So, there is no dispute about it. And you know, in 1906, I think it was, one Deen Muhammad filed a case in the Kashi court, and the only person he filed it against was the Secretary of State for India. No Indian or Hindu was involved, only Secretary of State for India. And there he makes a very important point. In hindsight, I feel, he says this entire Gyan Vapi complex is Waqf land, and the Hindus have no right to be here, and you please declare this as Waqf land. The Secretary of State letter is absolutely fascinating. Secretary of State's letter says there is no evidence that it was ever Waqf land, and the Secretary of State says, you please confine your namaz only to that structure. Don't venture out of it, because that is the place where Hindus come to worship there.
Yeah. So, I mean, we don't have the time to get into the entire history, but it's such a pleasure to talk to you. In conclusion, can I ask you, after the Ram Janmabhoomi settlement, many people have said that, you know, this was supposed to be the only exception. Do you believe court cases in Kashi and Mathura can also be settled in due time?
See, the point is, when the Ayodhya debate started, then the Mandir party told the Masjid party, you give us Kashi, Mathura and Ayodhya, we will not ask for anything else. The Idgah party refused, rejected the offer outright. They may be regretting that. But you know, this has a spiraling effect. Now, a few days ago, in Kashi and Mathura, I wait for what the court will do. Because in Ayodhya, the land had been freed before the
court judgment.
Here, the land has not been freed, and the masjid has been constructed in 1968 with the complicit role of a government of independent India.
In Mathura, you mean?
Yeah. So, that is that. In Kashi, I don't know what's going to happen. It's visible to the naked eye that it was a mandir there, there's a lot of evidence, but what the court will do after this is interesting. But I'd like to conclude by just saying that in 2000, the Supreme Court agreed that it would be willing to re-examine the Places of Worship Act.
Yes.
Whether it does that, when it does that, is an open question. But the fact that they have agreed to hear this, I think, is a very fortunate development.
Okay. We'll leave it on that note. Many thanks for speaking to us. And of course, thanks for the work that you've done. And it's all culminating now with the construction of the Ram temple in Ayodhya, and of course, the opening that everybody is waiting for. I do hope that you enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for watching.